Mattia Barina, and today in this presentation we will look into the future of chiller and heat pumps, with a significant focus on refrigerants that will be phased out, and consequently the related products that will also be phased out due to the introduction of the new F-gas regulation. As we can see from this slide, the F-gas regulation has the goal by 2050 of completely eliminating the quotas of HFC present in the Europe compared to the existing in 2015, when the first release came in there. As we can see from this chart, the first two significant steps of market reduction in HFC quotas will occur in 2027 and in 2030 respectively. In the next slide we will see how these dates are crucial because they essentially mark the introduction of the first bans. Categorizing the units, we can see that monoblock units below 12 kW reversible heat pump or polyvalent units must have a GWP below 150 from 2027, while from the 2032 onwards only natural refrigerant like propane, isobutane, azopentane or CO2 may be used. For monoblock units ranging from 20 to 50 kW, the deadline is still 2027 and the GWP remains 150. 150 is a very recurring number in the F-gas directive, as it has been identified as the maximum GWP of the refrigerant permitted for most chiller and heat pump in the HVAC industry. Returning to the table on this slide, for all monoblock units above 50 kW, the deadline is shifted to 2030, still with a GWP below 150. A substantial difference between this 2025 release and the previous one is the distinction for chiller units producing only chilled water, for example, for industrial sectors, or data center, with two distinctions, below and above 12 kW. Below 12 kW, the limit remains 150 of GWP from 2027, and from 2032, as with monoblock units, only natural refrigerant can be used, while for chillers above 12 kW, the deadline is still 2027, but the maximum GWP permitted is 750. So, in data center or industrial application, there will be the possibility to use a slightly wider range of refrigerant compared to what can be used for units such as, for example, heat pumps, monoblock or split systems. For split system we have two distinctions: air-to-water split system under 12 kW, so no VRF, variable refrigerant flow in this case, still with a 2027 deadline, GWP below 750, and from 2035 only natural refrigerant will be available, whereas for the rest of the split system, so split chiller heat pumps or over 12 kW, active VRF fall into this category. The two dates are 2029 with GWP below 750, and from 2033 we again see GWP below 150. So this slide summarizes an overview essentially of the bans and the implementation of the bans in the HVAC world. Now let's look at how in the HiRef catalog this ban will be applied in the coming years. Let's start with the first macro category, which is chiller and heat pumps. Air to water from 40 to 400 kW, so as low, medium power range. With this range, the first product line we'll find is the TPS, a range of chiller and heat pumps that cover a power range from 40 up to 390 kW in three different versions: chiller, heat pump or chiller with integrated free cooling. For this range, 14A will completely phase out in this version, so only chiller and free cooling from 2027, and the heat pump version for the smaller sizes 40-50 kW in 2027. Instead, for the rest of the range starting from 2030, 454B remains the valid alternative for this power range. In this range, for chillers chiller with free cooling, it can be used until 2050, since 454B has GWP of 467, so below 750, which is the limit for chillers, while for the heat pump version it will be available until 2050, but only for safety reasons, meaning only in the cases where a refrigerant with GWP below 150 cannot be used for safety reasons. With the same product, we find that TAS and the TSS range, which also cover a power range from 40 up to 250 kilowatt, in the same version as TPS, so chiller, heat pump and chiller with free cooling. And also for this range, R410A will be phased out from 2027 for chiller and heat pump under 50 kilowatt. And from 2030 for the range of heat pumps from 50 up to 250 kilowatts. In this case too, 454B remain a valid alternative, both for chiller and for heat pumps. As for the HPS, the heat pump with vapor injection compression, being available only with the 410A, it will be completely phased out across the entire range starting in 2027, for 40 kilowatt to 50 kilowatt and from 2030 from 50 to 200 kilowatts. Still staying within the same category, we then find the MHA range, also available in three versions, chiller, heat pump and chiller with free cooling, which also cover a power range from 40 to 300 kilowatts, for which, as with the previous mentioned range, 410A will be phased out starting in 2027 for chiller and heat pumps below 50 kilowatts, and from 2030 for heat pumps up to 300 kilowatts. Here too, 454B remains the only possible alternative, both for chiller, so the cooling version, and free cooling, and also heat pump version. We then find a process chiller, the PCC range, which is only available in 410A. So this range too we will completely phase out starting in 2027. Then we have the HWC range, a chiller and heat pump range for indoor installation with radial fans, also available only in 410A. So it too will be completely phased out from 2027 in the chiller and heat pump version up to 50 kilowatt, and from 2030 in the heat pump version up to 200 kilowatts. As for the split units, the TSE range in the cooling only version, 410A will be completely phased out by 2029. In this case, since it's a range of split chillers. Meanwhile, 454B will be an option available until 2050 without any restriction. The last two ranges in this segment are instead two lines that use natural refrigerants. The first is the CDA range of chiller and the heat pumps with CO2 refrigerant, so the refrigerant of excellence from the F-gas point of view, and the NHA range of chiller and heat pump, which instead uses R29 refrigerant, meaning propane. Both of the ranges are obviously F-gas compliant and guarantee long-term sustainability, and they are not affected by the F-gas directive, nor by the proposed regulation regarding the PFAS. Still staying within the same power range, let's now take a look at the polyvalent units. That is, unit that can produce simultaneously chilled water and hot water. The first range we'll look at is called MPA, a range of polyvalent heat pumps for 2-pipe and 4-pipe system, for which 410A will be phased out starting in 2030. While 454B will be an alternative, always for safety reason, where the use of a refrigerant with a GWP below 150 is not possible, but only until 2050. We then have the NPA range, a range of polyvalent heat pumps with R290 refrigerant, propane. So as previously seen with NHA and CDR ranges, this refrigerant that is long-term and sustainable from F-gas perspective, therefore a range that will be available in the long term. Whereas for the MPS range of polyvalent heat pumps with vapor injection compressor, since 410A is the only alternative, it will be completely phased out starting from 2030. Shifting instead to higher power ranges from around 300 kW up to 2 MW, we will look now at the ranges of air-to-water, chiller and heat pumps. The first range we'll look at is the TAL range, a multi-scroll chiller and with plated exchanger with cover power range from 290 up to about 1 megawatt, for which, again, in this case, 14A will be phased out in the cooling-only version chiller and chiller with free cooling version starting from 2027. For the heat pump, completely phased out by 2030. 454B, the multi-scroll range, will also remain an alternative until 2050 for safety reasons. So, as mentioned previously, where it is impossible to use a refrigerant with a GWP lower than 150. We then have the TSL range, equivalent to the TAL range, but with the shell and tube heat exchanger, for which we have seen for the TAL range, so chiller and free cooling from 2027, while the heat pump range will be phased out within 2030 completely with 14A. The same consideration also applies to the TPL range, which also cover a power range from 350 up to 1 megawatt of cooling capacity and heating capacity, for which the same ban apply. So from 2027, the chiller and heat pump range in 14A and heat pumps from 2030. Now moving into the strictly industrial and data center sector, we will find two chiller ranges with or without integrated free cooling, covering a wide power range up to about 2 megawatts. The first range is called TVA, and it is a chiller with screw compressor, for which in this case the only refrigerant that will be completely phased out from 2027 is R134A. Available alternatives will remain, such as 513A, 515B and 1234ZD, which may be used until 2050 without restriction from an F-gas perspective. Still staying within the high power range, we will now look at the polyvalent heat pump ranges. So, still within the 300 kilowatt to 1.1 megawatt range. With this range, we will find three product lines. The first is the MLA, a polyvalent heat pump, designed only for 4-pipe system, multi-scroll with plated exchanger, and the MSL or MPL range, multi-scroll with the shell and tube heat exchanger, also for only 4-pipe system. For both solutions, the ban of 14A will come into effect starting in 2030, while for 454B will remain a valid alternative only for safety reasons until 2050. We now move into the world of water-cooled chiller and heat pumps. So far we looked at this air-cooled chiller, now we move on to water-cooled units. The first range will look at covers a power range from 40 to 600 kilowatts, so medium-low range. With this range we find the XSB line of chiller and heat pumps, multi-scroll with plated exchanger, for which 14A will be phased out from 2027 for chiller and from 2030 for heat pumps. 454B will be a valid alternative until 2050 for chillers. While for heat pumps it will still remain a valid alternative, but as we saw for air-to-water heat pump, also in this case only for safety reasons. Within this range we also find the polyvalent version of the XSB called MSW for 2-pipe and 4-pipe system, to which the same consideration just mentioned apply. And the high temperature boosters, KSW, available with the 134A, which will be completely phased out by 2030. But will be available with refrigerant 513A only for safety reason until 2050, or with refrigerant 1234ZD without F-gas restriction until 2050. The last range of chiller and heat pumps I present to you cover a power range from 300 to 2.5 megawatt, and it mainly made up of three ranges. The first is the XVA range, a range of chiller and heat pumps with the shell and tube heat exchanger and screw compressors, for which 134A will be phased out starting in 2027 for the chiller version and 2030 for the heat pump version. The second range we'll look at is the turbocore range, so with turbocore compressor XTW, to which the same ban apply. For both ranges, 1234ZD will be the preferred solution. to ensure a sustainable option until 2050. But refrigerants like 513A and 515B will be also available, only for safety reasons, until 2050. The last range we'll look at is a heat pump range for a high temperature water production, available with 123,4Z refrigerant. So from an F-gas perspective, it's compliant until 2050 and still a sustainable and long-term solution. Thank you for your attention, and don't forget to follow us on social media.